And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. It is time once again for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan, and this is The Backstory. So once again, our producer, intrepid producer, Rod, has put together a great show. Our friend Tyler Nixon will be joining us in the first hour. Then in the second hour, we'll be talking to the great Ted Rall, our friend on the left. And joining us as a guest host in the second hour is Jason Goodman. So it's a dual Manhattan show, all Manhattan all the time, because that's where Jason is as well, on The Backstory. Now, it's interesting trying to cut through the BS today, because what we had is we had a big meeting between Emmanuel Macron from France and Vladimir Putin in Russia. Emmanuel Macron said in clear, assuming the translation is right, because who can tell with the French, but aside from 14-year-old high school girls, right? Because that seems to be a popular language if you're a high school girl. I'm just saying. I'm not judging. I'm just pointing out.
I took French, Lee.
Well, okay. And were there a lot of girls in the class? Then you.
Yeah, I took it in college, so yeah, there was a lot of girls.
Yeah, right. Because there's something romantic. You know what I'm saying?
Je parle français petit noir.
Oui? Is that right? Did I say something? But anyway. Yeah. But here's what's interesting. Did you see Macron's statement? He was very clear. He said Russia's not going to be initiating aggression against Ukraine. Did you see Macron say that?
Yeah, I think he's trying to save face for NATO. He's kind of like putting on his puppy's eyes for Putin. And I saw Putin's statement that he doesn't want to start a war, and that he appreciated Macron coming over there.
Now, if you listen to the mainstream media, and I have to because it's my job, but if you listen to the mainstream media, do you know how they're interpreting the exchange between Macron and Putin? Do you know what they're saying? They're saying that it's almost like Macron is holding Putin back. He's got his jacket, you know what I'm saying? Putin's got his fist in the air. He's thrown his vodka glass across the room, and he's trying to throw down. And Macron's like, hey, I'll drive you home. Right? That's the way they're making it out. They're like, Emmanuel Macron is trying to ease tensions. No, Emmanuel Macron is saying there aren't any tensions. Right? Because if the tensions are whether Putin's about to invade, he's very clear. Putin's not about to invade. And by the way, I don't think he'd say that if he thought Putin was about to invade, because that would come back to haunt him, don't you think?
Yeah, he's kind of doing the anti-Biden thing. He's kind of telling the truth, like, hey, there's no invasion. We need to calm things down. Look here, I'm meeting with Putin, and he's he's a diplomatic, you know. And
he's not diplomatic as Putin is wildly throwing his fists in the air and asking who wants to fight. You know what I'm saying? That's not what's going on. Putin is being, as Putin is, a serious adult, and just saying, I'm not going to invade Ukraine. And we know Zelensky's already said, hey, Putin's not going to invade here. They're continuing to say that. So therefore, the one who's throwing his fist around wildly is the old guy, right? Which is never a good sign. But
yeah, no, you're right about that. And that's how the media is presenting it one way here, and Macron's trying to present it to us in a clear, transparent way.
Right, and it is clear, but the media here literally won't report it. They won't report it. They won't say, because they can't. The media can't say, well, the U.S. has been pushing this, and even Ukraine says that what they're saying. I mentioned this yesterday, but it's amazing. If you look at this map from 2014 that the Washington Post ran in 2014 showing Russia surrounding Ukraine, do you know why it looks like Russia's surrounding Ukraine? By the way, do you know why that is, Rod?
Well, because Russia's so big.
And it literally surrounds Ukraine. Crimea kind of hooks under the bottom of Ukraine, and the rest of it is like a backwards crescent, or croissant, as you may call it, French-speaking, Rod. But literally, that's the way it is. It's almost like saying, I don't know, I don't even know what it's like saying. It's like saying Chicago is surrounding one of the Great Lakes, which is true, because it's literally surrounding one of the Great Lakes, right? That's the way it works. And so Russia is around Ukraine. It's over to the right of it and on top of it. And because of Crimea, it's underneath it. So when they say Russia's surrounding Ukraine, yes, they are. Because there's no other geographical possibility there. But I'm going to say this. The media is a big part of it. Now, I had a revelation in the past few days. So let me try to explain this, Rod. How does propaganda work? Let me ask a different question. How does the media work? Okay? Literally, think about the way when the New York Times or the Washington Post, when they write stories.
I would say they try to get an emotional reaction out of us. They're trying to get to our emotions.
They do try to get to our emotions, but they do it by using facts and white papers and quotes from people, right? That's where white papers, okay, and that's where think tanks come in, because someone from a think tank will say, we think that Vladimir Putin wants to invade Ukraine, said some guy you've never heard of from the Atlantic Council. But because of that, it seems like, okay, well, this serious person from this group says it, and this other group, then they quote some Soros-funded think tank. So what I'm getting at is that think tanks and groups like that are grist for the mill. Now, we know about Operation Mockingbird. That was where the CIA was trying to influence the media, okay? And we know about that from the 50s and 60s, Operation Mockingbird. Cord Meyer was the guy who was big in Operation Mockingbird. I mentioned Cord Meyer, because he's got, do you know anyone named Cord? Have you ever known anyone named Cord? Rod, you personally?
No, unless you're talking about like a Cordell, but I don't think that's his whole name. But I do know he's connected to the JFK. I believe his wife was sleeping with JFK, right?
Not just sleeping with, but getting high with. Cord Meyer's wife, ex-wife, Mary Pinchot Meyer. That Pinchot is important, not because she's related to Bronson Pinchot, although it's possible. But Mary Pinchot Meyer, the Pinchot family, they were very big in politics in, I believe, Pennsylvania. One of those states up there, around there, Pennsylvania, Delaware, one of those states. Her, like, great uncle or grandfather or something was governor. Anyone can look up Mary Pinchot Meyer, Pinshot, Pinchot, Pinchot, as they say. That's correct. Pinchot, right? That's Rod French.
Yeah, that could pass for French.
Okay, so Mary Pinchot Meyer was, John F. Kennedy was in love with her. Now, that's not a guess. And I don't just make claims like that. Like when I was reporting on the John Edwards story, I reported before anybody that this was not a one-night stand between John Edwards and Rielle Hunter, that they were in love. And the way I knew that is I had sources who were friends with Rielle Hunter. And it was obvious that they were in love. It was not just sex, which sometimes these things are. Like, I'll give you an example. Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton. I'm going to ask you to categorize it based on what you know. sex or love? Rod?
Oh, definitely just sex. Transactional.
That's right. Especially on his part. Now, she may have been in love with him or infatuated with him or goo-goo eyes or whatever. You follow me? I'm sure for her it felt like love and admiration, everything else. I don't think it quite felt the same for him. For him, it felt like, where can I put this cigar? Oh, I got it. Right? It's like a humidor. But in the case of Riel Hunter and John Edwards, that was love. And later it came out that they were planning their wedding. And I was the one who wasn't shocked. Everyone else was like, what's going on there? I don't know if I think I've told a story in the air before. I told you, Rod, or I told it on the air, that when I would write at the Huffington Post that what was going on between John Edwards and Riel Hunter was love, almost immediately someone commented and said, what are you talking about? How do you know they're in love? And they kind of implied that Riel Hunter was a slut. He wouldn't love her, blah, blah, blah. Did I tell you this story, Rod? Does it ring a bell?
Yeah, you've talked about it before.
Yeah, so I've talked about it. That comment came from none other than Elizabeth Edwards, John Edwards' wife. And I could tell by how quickly it came in and how adamant it was that I wasn't surprised it was Elizabeth Edwards. It kind of felt like something the wife would say. No, they're not in love. Well, they were. Well, John Kennedy was in love with Mary Pinchot Meyer. And we know that because love letters he wrote to her expressing his love right before he was assassinated have been sold at auction. So they've come out publicly. And anyone can look those up. Just look up JFK love letters, Mary Pinchot Meyer. And Mary Pinchot Meyer is a fascinating person. And she did get high at the White House with JFK. And in theory, dropped acid with him at the White House. Because she was one of the people that Timothy Leary was giving acid to. And so it's possible she tripped. And by the way, don't forget, we got Tyler Nixon coming up. Not that Tyler tripped. I think Tyler said he doesn't trip. Hasn't he said that? You've heard him say that, haven't you, Rod?
I think he said he's tried it, but he said it's too intense for him. I think he said he's tried it, though.
Well, I can see that because Tyler's pretty intense on his own. But I was going to say, if he's saying he's a deadhead and he's never tried hallucinogens, you can't help. At a dead show, you can't help but get a contact high. And that's tricky with mushrooms because there's no smoke or anything. But it's still, the atmosphere is psychedelic. And again, that was a term that was new to Rod. He'd never heard of deadheads before. Right, Rod? That's one of the things you learned producing a show is what a deadhead is, right?
Yeah, that's true. If I'm ever on Jeopardy, I know how to use that term.
Yes. And or if you're just hanging around deadheads. But apparently Mary Pinchot Meyer did hallucinogens with JFK. And some people say that JFK had a consciousness-altering experience, Rod, and did not want to go to war. In fact, I think I may have talked about this. Did you know that there was a group of wives in Washington who were trying to dose, in other words, give hallucinogens to their husbands who were part of the Pentagon to try to end the Vietnam War? Have you heard about that?
I never knew that story, but I wish, or I would hope that they would have did it and it would have worked. Because if you ever go on a trip, it's to me it's like the slinkies that used to go down the stairs. It's like if you pull that slinky, it's kind of like your brain. It just like comes apart a little bit.
Well, it is. Even the British Zen Buddhist philosopher Alan Watts, who I'm a big fan of. Alan Watts was a very scholarly. He's a very interesting person. And his book, In My Own Way, his autobiography is fascinating. He's a very learned person. He speaks multiple languages. He translated things from Greek into English. Very scholarly person. And he was a student of religion and philosophy and of Zen Buddhism. And he'd heard about LSD and all these other things. And he said, he's spoken about this in lectures, he thought it was a bunch of hooey, that it was like, he described it like someone who knows how to swim, forgive me, like someone who knows how to swim wearing water wings. That's why I said swing, it rhymes with wing. But in other words, if you know how to swim, if you took an Olympic swimmer rod and you put water wings on them, it wouldn't help them swim, would it?
No, it'd probably hinder them.
It would hinder them, right. Because it's fine when you're trying to stay afloat and you don't know what you're doing. But when you know what you're doing, it's a hindrance. So that's the way he thought hallucinogens would be compared to a real religious consciousness-altering experience, the kind of thing you can get through deep meditation or stuff like that. He thought it would not, and then he tried it. And he was very honest about it. He said, I was wrong. He said, it, in fact, is a shortcut to a psychedelic transformative experience. Because he thought you couldn't just put something under your tongue or pop a pill or whatever, better under the tongue. But he thought you couldn't just pop something under your tongue and alter your consciousness. Does that make sense? Like he said, you know, that's not going to work.
Oh yeah, no. You know, I've tried it. I've done it. The first time I did it with a girl, and it was a crazy experience. It's hard to explain, but it definitely does kind of put your perspective of where you are in the world, and like you said, your conscience, and it's hard to explain, but it
does. It alters, because I've talked about it before. I've done hallucinogens before, again, not for a while, but not out of any, I won't do that. It's just haven't. First off, I don't think you should do hallucinogens too much. If you're like, oh yeah, I do hallucinogens every weekend, chill out. If you're listening, I'm telling you right now, what apparently your friends aren't telling you, calm down on hallucinogens. Like Alan Watts has said, it's more medicine than diet. In other words, it's not something you should do constantly. Would you agree with that based on your experience, Rod, with hallucinogens?
Well, yeah, and then you build up a tolerance. So if you're trying to do it every weekend, you're going to have to like double and triple up, and then you're going to definitely lose yourself after that.
Yes, it's just not, as Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots said in a song once, too much tripping and my soul's worn thin. You will wear your soul thin. S-O-U-L. That's a brilliant line, because he could mean the soles of his shoes, but he doesn't. And Weiland, of course, died later. But that's a great line. And it would wear your soul thin. It's just too much. George Harrison, the great guitarist, songwriter, and singer from the Beatles, who had the bad luck to be the third best songwriter in a group of 4 people, and he's a pretty damn good songwriter, but he was still the third best behind Lennon and McCartney in that band. And one of my favorite quotes from George Harrison is, he said, he's talking to an interviewer, he says, you only need to take acid once, LSD once. And the interviewer says, so you've only taken it once? And he said, no, I've taken it lots of times, but I only needed it once. And no, and I thought that you're laughing, but you're laughing.
No, I know exactly what he means.
Because he's right.
Yeah, he's right. It's after that, it's for kind of an enjoyment, pleasure, or kind of an escapism.
Well, I've said before, Ingrid, I see, I'll get to you in one second. It's not. I'll tell you one other reason too. I've talked about this publicly before. About 10 years ago, my wife, my future ex-wife, and I know for a fact she hasn't processed this yet. I know this, that we lost a daughter at birth. And our youngest son was going to be a twin. And I realized that I haven't processed that. Does that make sense? Like, because my wife never wanted to talk about it, and I never wanted to push her to talk about it. And so we had no closure there. And so on that, and I don't know what closure even would mean, but part of the reason that I want to trip again at some point in the future is to deal with that loss. Does that make sense at all, Rod?
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, we're both on the same page. For some people who have never tried it, and they're not on the same page as us, is what you're thinking. But it's like, if you do it, let's say, and it's a 12-hour period, it seems like days, maybe. You know what I mean? So it's like you process a lot.
And one of the things that you process is your relationship with death. That is one of the things that's very consistent. In fact, at studies they've done at places like up the road there at, in what's the big medical center? It's not Johns Hopkins, or is it? Am I thinking of Johns Hopkins?
Yeah, Johns Hopkins.
Okay, so they've done lots of experiments with psychedelics there. And you know who this benefits? Psychedelics have benefited people who've been diagnosed with terminal cancer, for instance, who are having trouble dealing with it mentally. They found that trying hallucinogens helped them process that experience. And I can totally see that, because one of the things is it makes you, right? You know what I'm talking about, Rod. It does make you process death and think about death in a way. And so not just your own, but death in general. And I'll put it like this. Again, what we're saying, it's one of those things where if it doesn't make any sense, you've probably never tried hallucinogens. But if you've tried hallucinogens, you probably at least have some semblance of an idea what we're talking about. I want to get to Ingrid, 202-521-1320. Hey, Ingrid, what's on your mind?
Well, sorry to be a downer, but Trump and Ukraine. But just quickly, I think you should take up calling him French-speaking Rod instead of Rod from Philly. That has quite a ring to it. And on the Mary Pinchot-Meyer, that's also from the French, so it's not Pinchot, it's Pinchot, the spelling, with a C. But anyway,
yes.
Some guy on Sputnik yesterday was a guest and was saying that Biden was trying to do things opposite to Trump, and how Trump had just walked step and step and never challenged Putin. And that seemed like a real absurd thing to me. Is my memory clouded in a COVID haze or something? Didn't Trump put heavy sanctions on him? I mean, I thought Trump was fairly abominable.
Trump was worse than and by the way, what kind of haze did you say? Purple haze? No, some other. COVID haze?
Thick haze.
Okay. So, no, the Trump administration was far more harsh with Russia than the Obama administration in terms of these sanctions. And by the way, you saw they're now, I said this to Manila Chan last week, Congress is about to sanction Russia. They don't even need them to do anything because they knew they were never going to do anything. So they've been working on the sanctions bill for a week, and they're about to put it out. They got their bipartisan agreement on how they're going to sanction Russia for nothing. And Russia has said the sanctions are so harsh and ridiculous, they're not even worth commenting on. And I believe it. So Biden is trying to, I'll put it like this, sanctions, no one mellowed them out, and Trump didn't mellow them out at all. And Biden's not trying to be the opposite. Trump opened a door, and Trump should have been more skeptical. He should have seen what they were doing to him. But I said this the other night on Twitter, and I'll say it right here as well. And French Rod from Paris, let's do that.
Yes.
Can you think of any way, and I'm really serious here, and I'm not looking for someone to go, no, there's nothing. I'm looking for someone to tell me, thanks for the calling, your great call as usual. Can you think of a single way in which you're seeing Trump has gotten smarter or learned an effing thing since he's no longer president? Can you think of one example where, I saw him in a speech, he admitted that anything. Have you seen any examples of him getting smarter?
No, I got to be honest. And, I voted for Trump and, I supported him during his presidency and wanted him to succeed. I got to be honest, especially him being away from social media, he's probably either the same or maybe a little worse.
Right. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't have some personal bitterness, but I'll put it like this. If you're out of a relationship and the lesson you learn from it is that B word, you didn't really learn anything from the relationship. Does that make sense? You're bitter about it. You're angry about it, but that doesn't mean you learned anything. You follow me? So Trump has more or less called Netanyahu that B word, right? He's bitter about some stuff personally. He feels personally betrayed by Bibi. That's the B word, of course, that I was talking about. Just go with it, Rod. But
yeah, I got you.
But you can see that he's bitter. That's another B word. Trump is bitter about some things, but he has not learned anything. Does that make sense?
No, I agree with you. I think if he's more than likely, I'd say at least 80% chance going to run again for 2024. He's still going to bring in Jared. He's still going to bring in his daughter. So he's not. I don't think he's learned from that. He's probably just going to double down on the same people that made his administration bad.
And Trump learning something from this experience would be, to me, him saying, like about his daughter. He doesn't have to curse her name or call her names. He just has to say, I love my daughter. I made a mistake bringing her in the administration. She has fundamentally different political values than I am. I should have been able to tell by the fact that she was close friends with Huma Abedin and Chelsea Clinton that she may ultimately have had different values. And I want my kids to have their own set of values. So I love my daughter, but I don't want her or her husband anywhere near the White House, because I think Jared Kushner, who comes from a family of Democrats, who's a lifelong Democrat, whose father was the biggest Democrat donor, aside from blackmailing his own brother-in-law, aside from that, his values don't represent mine. And that I think President Trump, was too conciliatory to Israel. And by the way, let me say this too, because I talked to Rod. We're going to get Addy ads on again soon, because there is new Ghislaine Maxwell stuff that's ongoing. But I've got to say, it's so obvious that what was going on there was a joint Israel-UK operation, right? Because Ghislaine Maxwell, Robert Maxwell, that's a joint UK-Israel operation right there, correct? I mean, obviously British citizen who had a hero's funeral in Israel because he was a spy. And I read a very good article recently that talked about how Israel is controlled by the Brits. And think how freaking crazy it is, Rod, that for some reason our two biggest allies are the UK and Israel. Israel, who's clearly running a spy operation through Jeff Epstein on U.S. soil, and the UK was right at the center. We know this even more now at Russiagate, that British intelligence was behind it. We'll talk about, there's new news with the Durham investigation, by the way, we'll talk about, because I'm a little confused by it, Rod. Are you clear on what's going on with the Durham investigation?
Well, with the Durham investigation itself, with the new news, I'm not surprised, and we're going to talk about it with Tyler. But I told Tyler earlier that the Durham investigation is moving at a turtle pace. Because I mean, if they brought you in, I think they could have it done within like a couple months.
Well, I'll put it like this, and we'll talk to Tyler about it because Tyler is a lawyer American. And so we'll talk to him about some of the legal aspects. I'm not a lawyer American. I'm not opposed to them. I've dated lawyers. And so I support lawyer Americans, but from a distance. And sometimes literally, because when you start sending them money, I think you are supporting them quite literally. But I'm curious if more people should have been indicted already. That's what I'm getting at. I think strategically there's something weird going on. And we'll talk about that with our friend Tyler Nixon coming up right after this on the best damn talk show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. Joining us now, great friend of the show. We always love having him on. The great Tyler Nixon. Hey, Tyler, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to be with you, as always.
Good to have you. So let's just get this out of the way because we mentioned it before. We're talking about tripping, and I said I thought you'd said you had not tripped, even though you're a deadhead. Now, and Rod thought differently. He said he thought you'd tried them maybe, but they weren't for you. So what's going on, Tyler?
I think Rod is correct. Yeah. At least that's what I thought. I mean, this is years, and this is when I was, maybe 20 years old. And believe what I tried what I thought was or believed to be that. It's something I think George Harrison was right. it's something that you only really need to do once. But,
yes.
Obviously people do it a lot. Too much. Timothy Leary, the end of his life, I mean, it's almost like he had some sort of, it's not that they're unintelligent, but they just sound sort of dopey.
Literally. And and there is, although Terrence McKenna managed after doing many heroic doses, Terrence McKenna was seemed okay. Although, you know, like I say, it does definitely give you a different perspective. So anyway, Tyler, speaking of different perspective, let's talk about some of the stuff going on. And let's talk about the Durham investigation first. And I'm going to tell you my theory. My theory is, and I don't know this, but you might have a better handle on this than I do. It seems to me like the Durham investigation should have indicted more people already. What I mean by that is, it seems to me when you're doing an investigation of this scope, you want to start indicting lower down people so they'll flip. And this is what they were doing against Trump. He said they were getting people like our mutual friend Roger Stone, who didn't flip because they had nothing to flip on. It seems to me like going the opposite way, though. There are some people in the Justice Department, let's say, who do clearly know more than they're letting on, and that they should have been indicted at an earlier stage to try to get them to flip. So what am I getting wrong here as a civilian, Tyler?
Well, you know, in these types of investigations, you're going to have the desire to prolong it when it's for media exposure, such as the Russia hoax investigation and the Mueller team that was dragged out over time when they really had nothing. I mean, when you look at in the end of it, they didn't find anything. They just made it into a spectacle for nearly 2 years and dragged Roger Stone into court, persecuted him. You know, I'd use that term very specifically. And then there's another reason that an investigation with someone like, in the case of Durham, would drag out. It's because they are dragging their feet, the people involved who are potentially targets or would have information to protect people. And we know where this is leading. It's leading directly to the dragon lady, Madam Kankles, Hillary Clinton, at the center of, you know, her presidential campaign, which was behind this entire massive fraud perpetrated on the country and directed at Donald Trump and his campaign. And this is exactly, I think, Durham is showing that he's not willing to just let things go, but he's meticulous enough. He's not just going to bring a bunch of trumped-up charges, excuse the pun, against anybody, as was done in the Mueller investigation, quote, investigation, the witch hunt. He's not going to do that. He's not going to. He's going to bring up righteous charges, which, when you've got uncooperative people at every end of the investigation, from the FBI to the Clinton apparatchiks, it makes it very difficult. And I think Durham should be righteously outraged. Now, can you imagine if it was the case? I hate to. It's the old, you know, it's overused, frankly, the analogy of what if the Republicans were, you know, fill in the blank, and then what the reaction would be. But I mean, it unfortunately you have to use it because it's so true. Imagine if it was discovered that the Inspector General had been withholding crucial or vital or at least relevant evidence in the Russia hoax investigation somehow that had come to light. Do you think it'd be just some random New York Post article, or do you think it'd be like front page and headline news, CNN round the clock? If it was somehow benefiting Donald Trump, or perceived that way.
Well, so let's go over some of the details there, because I actually had missed this story. Our intrepid French-speaking producer, Rod, had sent it to me this morning, but I'd missed it. That's how little coverage this got, because I would have noticed this. So if I understand the story correctly, this is what happened. The Durham investigation asked the Inspector General's office, Horowitz's office, we need to know, they were doing discovery. And did your office meet with this guy, Sussman, who we're indicting? Right? And they had been dragging their feet on discovery. Then it turned out that they had met with him in early 2017. And so they didn't forget that. And there were notes of it. And it was clear that they'd met with him. And they never mentioned it to the Durham investigation. Do I have the factual predicate, as they say sometimes? I don't know what that means, yes, but it sounds good.
I mean, what's particularly troubling is that I know you can just, from a distance, look at the Durham investigation, know that these guys are doing it by the numbers. Durham's reputation is sterling. I mean, there's nobody can come out. I mean, that's why you don't see much coverage, because they have no way to bash him or call him a partisan. But the fact is, he's trying to bring do a righteous investigation into the origins of the Russia Trump investigation. And you have another agency of government, supposedly also an investigative agency, the Inspector General, though not prosecutorial, that has basically been sort of drabbling as though it's like some adversarial process, the critical information that Durham needs. And here's the thing, is that it only came to Durham's attention because of the defense basically brought it to his attention. So that's really embarrassing for any sort of prosecutor, especially at that level, to have the defense bringing out information that the government itself did not provide to the government, which Durham is. So you have basically at odds within the government itself, Horowitz versus Durham, which in my view calls Horowitz's motives into question and his allegiances and frankly his integrity. The fact that they would withhold something as critical as a meeting between the Inspector General Horowitz and the defendant, and relevant to anything that's being investigated, and this guy's being prosecuted, so he's innocent until proven guilty. He has rights. Regardless of the fact that he was a Hillary Clinton attorney and apparatchik. We're not like the other side. We don't just condemn people based on simply whatever the media runs and decides to trump up and pump up. So, but yes, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, this is correct that there's withholding there. There's it's a typical. It's exactly what it I mean, basically in the Trump-Russia investigation, there was nothing to withhold because there was nothing. And in this case, though, they know where it's leading, and I think there's dragging of feet, and it shouldn't take this long, really, and it wouldn't take this long. No. But it's really looks bad. It makes Durham look. Go ahead.
No, keep going. Finish your thought there, Tyler.
No, I mean that was it. It was just that it's just. They couldn't lionize Robert Mueller and his hench weasels enough, and frankly, portray it as though they were onto something. There was always this, wait till it comes out how Trump and Putin are buddies and they have secret blah 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 whatever. And here you have Durham, who's a veteran, independent prosecutor who's just going after where the facts lead him. You never hear about it. He's being basically everything's being withheld. They're dragging their feet, and you don't hear anything about the investigation. So, and I would say it's extraordinary in the case of Durham that he would come out and go public with this, because he's not of the Mueller ilk where everything gets fed to the media and the whole purpose of the thing is just to drag your opponents through the mud for 2 years. He was, you don't hear about it probably because he's doing his job righteously. He's not running around leaking things and feeding things to the media. He's doing his job as he should. And for him to come out publicly really means that there's serious, in my view, misdeeds going on with Horowitz, which, obviously, where does that lead you?
Well, let me talk about the serious misdeeds going on with Sussman, the guy they're indicting. Because I didn't understand this part of the story. This is what confused me. In the story, they mentioned that Sussman had 2 devices attached to a computer network of a foreign government. You remember that line in the story?
Yeah, well, I don't think Sussman did. I think that they said that someone in the Inspector General's office did. Someone,
like I say, was confused. But even that, so let's go with that. Someone in the in Horowitz's office had a device attached to a foreign. What country would you, if you had a guess, name that country? What would you say it is? Because that's a really weird detail, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is odd. I mean, I think you could look at what's at the center of the entire brouhaha created by the Clinton campaign. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It'd either be Great Britain or Russia.
Or I'm going to say Great Britain or Israel. See, Russia, if it was Russia, it seems to me like that would have come out. And they're not naming the country in the Post story that I saw. My guess is it's going to turn out to be either Great Britain or Israel, We know that Great Britain's right at the center of this, and Israel's not far because Great Britain's involved. And we also know that Israel's got big spy operations that often intersect with U.S. operations, as we've seen from the Epstein story. But I thought that was a really bizarre detail that someone, as you say, in the Inspector General's office had devices that were going to a network in a foreign country. And I can't believe it's Russia. Doesn't make any sense to me, because why would someone from the Inspector General's office be communicating with Russia? So Great Britain makes a good deal of sense to me. Some Five Eyes country.
Sounds like Hillary with her private server, you know?
Yeah, but that is a weird detail. Don't you think, Tyler? That's a weird detail.
It is, and it's an allegation, as I understood the reporting, that it was alleged, you know, that it was brought out by the defense. So this is just, I mean, it's bizarre because they said it has some relevance. They stated that. But what it really does, though, is I think it embarrasses Durham. Or doesn't embarrass him, but I mean, it really puts the lie to Horowitz's claims of being this, or purporting to be this above board, neutral guy. And they did this thorough investigation. I mean, his investigation was a complete whitewash, which also took forever, by the way.
Now, let me ask you a question about. Now, this is something I'm very curious about, actually, because I had Enrique Tarrio from the former leader of the Proud Boys on last week, and I asked him a question about how he feels having had the full weight of the media machine. You know, Enrique became public enemy number one. I don't know how else to put it. And so when this weight comes down, like it came down on Joe Rogan over the weekend, right? And Roger knows it too, obviously. When suddenly everyone in the media world, you know what I mean by public enemy number one, everybody's talking about you. Ask me how I felt about that. Let me ask you a question. You're a guy, lawyer, been involved in politics for a while. When you saw what happened to Roger Stone, because a lot of people, I think, looked at the footage of the cops coming in with long guns to Roger Stone's house. Then they found out that they had boats behind his house and that the CNN reporter was right outside waiting for it. A lot of people saw that and felt some sense of outrage, but in the same way, you can't really feel it because most people don't know Roger, so they can only get so outraged by it. It's like something they're watching on TV, if that makes sense. But for you personally, Tyler, I'm wondering what you've seen the past couple of years. My guess is it's had to have affected you profoundly in the very way that you view the government. I don't see how anybody, knowing a little bit about what I do, about what you've gone through and what people have gone through, how can you view the U.S. government the same? I don't see how you could. So you don't, right?
All right. Well, first of all, I don't consider myself a lawyer. Okay. So you have Esquire, which is someone I think who's lettered in the law, understands the law, right? You have counselor, is someone who represents or speaks for counsels others as to the law. Then you have attorney, someone who represents others and speaks for them. Lawyers are just people who make money from the law with law licenses, as far as I'm concerned, So anyway, that being said, yes, absolutely. And it's funny, what prepared me for what happened to Roger Stone very much in terms of, first of all, view of the government, setting that aside for a second, but just the differential between what really happens and how it's reported in media was working for Newt Gingrich from 1994 to 1995. So when I started with him, he was the minority whip. When he, 3 months later, we, worked with him during the Contract with America introduction, went to the staff meetings with all it. It's very exciting. All the candidates signed it. Boom, he's speaker. And to know, firsthand from the Speaker's office and his congressional office what they were discussing, what was going on, and then to see how it was reported in the major networks was a shocker. I mean, it was shocking. It infuriated me, but also eventually made me realize what really goes on, which is that it's just the Democrats, and I hate to make it a Democrat-Republican thing. These Democrats would just outright fabricate stories for the media to run with, like Newt's going to take your Social Security away, as an example. And we would get calls all day long from thousands of people, constituents and otherwise. You better tell Newt not to take my Social Security. It was like he said absolutely it's off the table. It's not, it doesn't matter. It's just like they would make it up out of whole cloth. This is back in the era of David Bonnier with his ethics complaints against Newt. 100 ethics complaints, only one of which actually amounted to anything, and even then was just like a technicality. That being said, with Roger, boy, oh my gosh, you think the depths to which these people are capable until they sink lower. I mean, I was shocked, frankly, at the manipulation, and still am shocked when I go back and review documents and consider what was done. For example, the way the grand jury was led and the way the manipulation of testimony there. And then the media reporting, of course, adding that back in. It really, you have to think. I mean, I used to have some level of faith in some aspect of the system, like, okay, well, in the judicial branch, you'll get some level of things will be sorted out. If it reaches that stage, you'll have fair people who, have integrity, and they're not going to put up with nonsense. They're not going to play these shenanigans. That's all gone. I mean, my view of the government now is that it is just a power free-for-all. Whoever is in there and is the most ruthless and unethical and criminal, frankly, that can get away with what they can get away with, and they will destroy anybody in their path and use any power, and it doesn't matter. There's no limits to what they will do. As we now see playing out, frankly, with the defendants from the January 6th event, who are treated like, I mean, people at Guantanamo have better treatment than they're giving these folks on trespassing charges in some cases, just basic misdemeanor trespassing. So yeah, Roger's experience, my God, just I could give you an example. We were privy to documents which essentially, in my view, outed the FBI and the special counsel's office as not only just monitoring like a pen register, our communications, me and Roger, in other words, our communication as his attorney, communications with each other, meaning like text registering when and we texted each other or when we called each other, spoke to each other, but the content of those texts. I discovered something that I thought was revealing of the special counsel having access to the actual content. And we confronted them with it, and they're just like, oh, no, that doesn't mean, no. And they denied it, and they sloughed it off. But I mean, the way it was phrased, it was an email between an FBI agent and Jeannie Rhee. And, it was an email between two of the FBI agents leading in the investigation, saying, well, maybe we should give them, this information, which implied that they would give them the actual text between each. And this is when I was interviewed by the FBI. And the FBI is funny because when they interviewed me, I asked if I could record it, or I said, I want to record this, and they refused. And I'm like, what? Why would they have it? You know why? Of course, Lee, because, right. They want to write the 302 the way they want it to come out and sound. And, gosh, an actual recording, whoa, we would want that. You would think they would want it by the numbers, they would have no problem with that. And that's the way our government should operate. Our government should be above reproach in terms of, especially law enforcement and the FBI, in interviewing a witness. They should have no problem with that person having recorded that, But they wouldn't let me do it. So that being said, I and it's funny because they asked me, do you speak with Roger? Are you going to talk to Roger about this? Or have you told Roger? And, I think they think that, like, people somehow go in there and don't realize, they think to themselves, well, gee, I better not tell them. I'm going to go and tell Roger what they said. Or, you know what I mean? Like somehow they're supposed to maintain privity or confidentiality with the FBI or the government. I said, absolutely. I said, I'm going to hang, as soon as you leave, I'm calling him and telling him exactly everything I said, everything you said. And I told him this, and I think everyone was taken aback because I was like, absolutely, yeah. He's my client, he's my friend, and I'm going to tell him exactly what you said and what I said. And that's that, So, it's just this whole game of we're supposed to assume the integrity of these government agencies and these law enforcement agencies and these politically motivated, politically ulterior motivated partisans, as they're like Mueller. I mean, his reputation was such that we all have to accept his word as gospel and blah blah blah. Well, I mean, what little faith I had left, I think, in the system overall and the government, certainly was blown out by the persecution of Roger Stone, and the manipulations that went on, and the deceit and the just the game playing and frankly unethical and bordering on, in my view, criminal abuse of power perpetrated by the prosecutors sicked on him.
Well, again, and I agree completely. And, we've all heard those stories about somebody, they were on a plane, let's say, and they got sick to their stomach, so they got off the plane. Then the plane crashed on takeoff. We've all heard those stories of people who, they could have been in a disaster. I'm one of those people because when they finally released Roger's testimony in front of Schiff and other people, and I saw they were asking about me, Schiff wanted to call me in front of the House, but it's only because they sent it to the wrong email address. It ended up in spam. I didn't get the request. So therefore, for the grace of God, literally, I just, I would have gone, right? And I think if I'd gone, they would have found something to indict me on. Does that make sense?
But yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, though, you really reveal their true motives, because Lee, you're not some high-profile Trump ally and consultant and longtime confidant. So they didn't care whether they had to compel you to testify. They wanted Stone's scalp, and that's why they pursued him to the ends of the earth. Versus it wasn't important to them whether they actually got you in there or not.
No, that's
because they didn't you weren't a target for them.
I was more useful to them in that they could say that I used to work for Breitbart and I work for Sputnik, and use that against him. That's where. Yeah. But I and again, a lot of people out there, I'm sure, feel it, but until it happens to someone close to you, like you say, like a friend of yours, I don't think. Do you think people really get what you went through? Because there's no way they could, is there, Tyler?
No, it's like you said, it's like watching like the raid on him. It's like it might as well be a TV show, might as well be a crime drama. It's not real until you experience it, until your life is destroyed and you have this overhang, the sword of Damocles of federal power hanging over your head when they're literally wiretapping your conversations, and you have to be cautious. You can't even talk freely, even between counsel and client.
Now, do you think people are getting, and real quickly, we're almost out of time, but do you think people are getting some sense of it? Because this COVID thing hit everybody, and now we're seeing the changing narrative, the changing story on that. Do you think people are starting to get it in a more visceral way? Let me put it like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. And I think it's unmetered. In other words, we can't see it, but I think there's been a big shift in the sense that people get it. They may not speak out about it. They may not talk about it. But they will. Their will shall be reflected in November. And I don't think any amount of vote fraud shenanigans are going to be able to spare the Democrats their fate, and much deserved one at that.
I think you're completely right. Tyler Nixon, great appearance as usual. Thanks for joining us. We have more coming up right after this on the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from America and just outside the Matrix. Most days, way outside the Matrix. It is time for the second hour, last hour today, of the best damn radio show in the world. It's The Backstory. Investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. That was Tyler Nixon joining us. Great interview. Always love talking to Tyler. Joining us now is our guest host for the hour, our friend Jason Goodman. Hey, Jason, how you doing?
I'm great, Lee. How are you?
Well, you know, it's weird, but I think it's weird for everybody. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I do. I think one of the defining things about our age right now, not our age as in we're being old, I mean the era of time we live in.
Yeah.
Is how freaking weird it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Do you agree? Things weren't this weird in the 80s, were they?
They were weird in a different way. I think now the weird, at least in my opinion, that you're describing is this contradiction of fact. And in the 80s, things were weird because people were wearing, like, you know, parachute pants and spiked hair.
Yeah, but that was, I'll put it like this. They weren't worried about the encroaching tyranny of their government. And I think a lot of people get that sense all over the place now. You know what I'm saying?
I do, particularly in Canada and the United States.
And I'll put it like this. And I said this on Twitter the other day. If you're not a conspiracy theorist, at least a little bit right now, you're stupid. I'm going to be blunt about it. No, I'm serious. If you're like, no, I don't believe any of that conspiracy theory, then you're just stupid. You're not paying any freaking attention at all to the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that are, you know, conspiracy theory, I just hate the word because it's such a nondescript, undefined. I mean, you know, it's not one person doing all of this, so someone's making a conspiracy.
Things that have been called conspiracy theories. We'll talk about that. We got a clip in 1 second. Ted Rawls joining us from somewhere else in Manhattan. You're in Manhattan, so see this hour on The Backstory. So let's talk about some of the stuff with some degree of specificity, shall we?
Yeah.
So one thing going on, let's get the clip ready. Let's play this clip from the person talking about masks. Now, when I woke up this morning, because also, I got to say, one thing is adding to the sense of surreality for me is my sleep schedule, which is sometimes I'm up all night. Sometimes I'll sleep for 3-4 hours, then I'll work. So my sleep schedule's surreal. That's true as well.
Yeah.
Okay, but I want you to hear. So when I woke up this morning, Jason, what I saw was a mainstream media headline, New York Times or Post, I forget who, and they said, liberal governors all across the country are getting rid of mask requirements at schools.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting headline because what it told me is that they know that the mask requirements are a bunch of BS.
Yeah, exactly.
And even the Democrat governors are giving into that and saying, yeah, it's a bunch of BS. So then later in the day, I saw this quote and I asked Rod to grab it. This is somebody talking about, now listen to what she says here. Let's have a listen to this, shall we? Play it. This is from CNN.
Do you agree with the move?
I do. There was and is a time and place for pandemic restrictions, but when they were put in, it was always with the understanding that they would be removed as soon as we can. And in this case, circumstances have changed. Case counts are declining. Also, the science has changed. We know that vaccines protect very well against Omicron, which is the dominant variant. Everyone 5 and older have widespread access to vaccines. And we also know about one-way masking, the idea that even if other people are around you are not wearing masks, if you wear a high quality mask, that also protects you, the wearer, too. And so in this case, I'm not saying, I don't think anyone really is saying that no one should ever wear masks, but rather that the responsibility should shift from a government mandate imposed from the state or the local district of the school. Rather, it should shift to an individual responsibility by the family, who can still decide that their child can wear a mask if needed.
Okay, now, so first off, Jason, the thing I want to point out there is that the science has changed. It would be like if tomorrow you went outside and you noticed cars floating in the sky and planes were dropping out of the sky because they were hit by cars.
Yeah.
And then you said, well, that's weird. And you check the news, they said, well, the science has changed. You'd go, what? The science doesn't change.
Well, science changes all the time, Lee. Our understanding of the universe. I mean, what is science? Science, as I understand it, is the process of attempting to understand that which we know nothing about, this universe that we are in, the human body, health, etc. It's the constant questioning, the constant pursuit of knowledge. And by the way, you know, when they discovered DNA, which they had never known about before, that was like the 1940s or the 1950s, everything they understood about medical technology changed. And I believe that there remain other great discoveries out there that we do not yet know anything about that could fundamentally shift, a tectonic shift in our understanding of the universe, our bodies, our health, etc.
Let me disagree with you for a second, Jason. This is the point, I think, is that what you're saying, science is a way of expanding knowledge. That's what's changed. That's not what science is anymore.
Right.
That's not what science is. I'm going to redefine the reality. My working definition of science is something that you use, that you trot out to make your political point. Right? Well, that's my working definition of what science is now.
Yes.
That's my theory.
You're right. That I agree with.
And so the science has changed. Science has changed. It's now they don't even try. And even the stuff she was saying, I heard her say in there that we know now that vaccines are very good at stopping Omicron. No, we know the opposite.
Exactly, exactly.
What she said right there was exactly the opposite of what we know from quote-unquote science. What we know is that study after study came out saying vaccines aren't stopping Omicron. Remember that?
Yeah, and we see it all around us. You know, famous people. We got Chelsea Handler is in the hospital. She had some comedy tour announcing that she's vaccinated and ready for whatever. And then, like, the first day, she got sick and went to the hospital. So, I mean, that doesn't sound good. So I'm saying
this idea that literally she's lying on CNN about vaccines and Omicron with a straight face in the midst of saying, well, the mandates. I'll tell you another thought I had today, because we now know, Sharif, I see you on the line. We'll get to you in 1 second. We now know that the government has come out and said, Johns Hopkins came out and said lockdowns weren't medically effective at all.
Right.
Now, I want everyone to stop and think, because I said it on a show the other day, but I didn't stop and ponder it. If freaking lockdowns, the harshest thing you can do, lockdowns involve social distancing. They're literally keeping you away from everybody, right?
Yeah, right.
So let's ponder this. If that wasn't effective, what was? Does that make sense?
Yeah, nothing that the United States did or nothing that the medical community around the world did was effective. I mean, Lee, it's a simple fact, and I know that people hate it when this is said, but this is one point that Donald Trump was correct about. Every single viral pandemic in the history of mankind eventually just went away because of something called the depletion of susceptibles. And the reason we know that is because if that were incorrect, we would not be here. We would have been wiped out by a virus. But even the Spanish flu, whatever kind of pandemic you want to talk about, people who are susceptible to getting it, people who are weak because they're young or old or sick or whatever, They come in contact with the virus, they become sick from the virus, and they either die or they have an immune response that causes them to get better and have antibodies. And when enough people are exposed to the virus and develop antibodies, the virus can't replicate and it just goes away. They did this before they ever had vaccines, and this is the way it always goes.
And what they haven't admitted yet, but they're going to have to at some point, is that really the number of deaths from COVID was very small.
COVID alone.
Right?
Right. Yes. Something like 6% of the overall number was COVID alone. 94% had comorbidities. And the number one comorbidity, this to me, Lee, is the perhaps Rosetta Stone to this whole thing. The number one comorbidity among those that have died in the past 2 years of COVID, with COVID, whatever, is influenza. And separate from that fact, in October 2020, or March 2020, I forget exactly the date, Birx announced this, and you can go and look at the World Health Organization, or you can listen to John Cullen Investigates on Crowdsource the Truth. Influenza reporting by every nation that reports to the World Health Organization totally stopped for 20 months. It went from, in some countries, 2,000, 4,000 cases per month to 0, all within the same 3-week period in every country around the world. And that just is not the way anything behaves except for manipulated data.
Now, what we're seeing in Canada, then I'll get to Sharif, but I want to start talking a little bit about what we're seeing in Canada and what I talked to Tyler Nixon about at the end of the last hour. I think there's something happening that more and more people are sick of it and are saying something about it and are ready to speak out against it. And we played the clip yesterday. Did you see this one Mountie who resigned up in Canada? Did you see that guy?
Yeah.
I'm waiting for a mass movement of police officers here in the United States who step up and go, you know what? I did not become a cop to check people's medical papers.
Yeah.
Like I'm Dr. Nazi.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think it's getting to a point where people who've been, because one statistic that came out recently is we've had more cops murdered in the year of the Biden presidency than we have in previous years.
Really?
Did you see that? Yes.
I mean, I didn't, but I could believe it. Certainly we've had 2 in New York, and it's just February.
Yes, the highest number of cops killed. It's like 80, something like that. Whoa. And here's what I'm getting at. Cops knew that they had a big chunk of Americans who wanted to back the Blue Lives Matter, right?
Yep.
A lot of those people are now saying, hey, you know what? F you, cops. If this is the way you're going to be, we're not going to defend you.
Yeah.
So cops, I think, are starting to realize that the people who were their biggest supporters are now going to become their biggest critics.
Yeah.
Which I think shows that those people are being fair. But do you see that trend happening societally by people who were giving cops? They did support the Blue. They did back the Blue. But now they're going, not if you're beating up old men in the street. We don't over whether they're wearing a mask or vaccinated.
Showing the ID or whatever. Right. That happened in Canada yesterday. You know, last night here in New York City, I believe 10 people, and I saw one of them being let out, who looked like a 15-year-old child, were arrested at a movie theater for watching the movie without a mask. And, I mean, in response to your question, Lee, I don't know. I frankly, at this point, will be surprised if we see a mass movement, because that video of the RCMP officer who resigned out of morality and ethics, I think represents, not among police, I think among humans, a very small minority of anyone who has integrity and holds that integrity over their immediate needs. And what I mean by that is, I think there's a lot of people in a lot of professions, including law enforcement, who say, you know what, I'm just going to keep my head down, do what they tell me to do. I'd rather be in this movie theater arresting a 15-year-old kid than on the beat in the Bronx or Harlem or the East Village or somewhere where there's likely to be people with guns. None of these kids in the movie theater watching Jackass are going to shoot me, so we'll just arrest this kid, and I'll keep doing this for another 8 years, and then I'll get my pension, and I'll go do something else.
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and this is what people should watch for. The way these things work, and then I'll get right to you, Tarif, right after I make this one point. I've talked about it before. There's a great video. You used to be able to find it on YouTube very easily. And it was a guy at a concert, and he's dancing vigorously.
Yeah.
And no one around him is dancing. And he was dancing and really feeling it.
Yeah.
And then, after about a minute of this, somebody gets up and starts dancing with him.
Ah.
Then, after a minute of that, just the two guys dancing, somebody else gets up and starts dancing.
Yep.
Then, after about 30 seconds, 3, 4, 5, 100 people get up.
There you go. You're right. You're right.
That's the way human beings work.
Correct.
At first, nobody wants to join in.
Right.
Then you get one person join in. So here's what I'm saying. I'm waiting to see if we get the first cop who does what that Mountie did and says, you know what? I can no longer be a cop in good conscience. Here's my video. Let me talk about it. Then you'll get a third one. And then suddenly, when there's groups of cops walking with riot guns to make people put on a mask, you see what I'm getting at, Jason?
No, you're right. You are a persuasive guy, Lee. You have convinced the jury. I think that might happen.
And I think we're getting to the point of the second or third guy. Does that make sense?
I hope
we're
you're
getting
right,
to that point. And that's why someone who follows me on Twitter, Irish girl, said courage is contagious, and she's right. But it's slow.
Yeah. It's not like Omicron.
That's right.
Omicron.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
Good point. 202-521-1320. Tarif, thanks for waiting. What is on your mind?
Thank you, gentlemen, for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange, free Dunninger, and hashtag no more. I have two comments. The first comment is dealing with, I was listening to Alex McCurris and some other analysts today. Germany have not yet to come out and tell Ukraine that they're going to sanction Nord Stream 2, because if they do that, the reasoning behind that, if they do that, then you might see Ukraine might go ahead and create a false flag, which is going to make things worse. And that's why, the German chancellors have yet to say that they are sanctioning Russia. So if a war breaks out anyway in Europe dealing with Russia or whatnot, and a limited war in Ukraine dealing with Russia, you will see the euro collapse, the economic pressures what Poland have, Ukraine, and other nations in Europe. The euro become weak, and the U.S. will step in and start buying up the euro bonds, and Europe basically will become like a vassal state to the United States or something. We'll have to do whatever the United States tell them. And the presidents and the prime ministers of Europe, the smart ones, like sad to say this, but in France and Germany and Italy knows this. And that's why they're very cautious, and they're meeting with Putin constantly. My second comment is dealing with the Joe Rogan thing. They have this Twitter thing called Woco Distance. Jimmy Dore explained last night. I'm glad he found it and he talked about it. This is a hit on Joe Rogan. This is planned out. The group that attacked Joe Rogan was basically Patriot Takes, at Patriot Takes on Twitter. They are partnered with Media Touch, MEIDAS Touch. Media Touch is a super PAC. It's a Democratic super PAC that's run by three brothers. And some of these brothers is connected to Hollywood. We're dealing with social media working with Ellen DeGeneres and others, and one of them is connected to the NFL. I forgot what the other one do. So basically, Patriot Takes is talking smack on the internet, and Jimmy Dore, how he was explaining it, that the big gold prize was to take down Joe Rogan because his audience, are free tech thinkers, to basically destroy him. Not just because the vaccine thing that he went after the vaccines thing is to get him away, get him out of the future dealing with the elections, because he's a variable that they can't control. So they trying to get him out the way when the upcoming elections in 22 and 24. So that's why they trying to get rid of him, and also by doing what they're doing to him, they can raise funds from other wealthy donors that can give money to them to go after other people. So basically, this is a planned thing to basically take him down, and also to put fear into others not to stand up and speak their minds about certain issues, and to move people out the way from these establishing organizations like the DNC or GOP, so they won't interfere in upcoming elections. So it's deeper than just Rogan. It's about the whole concept itself.
Well, Tarif, that's great call as usual. But Jason, you've done video production long enough to know. I could tell right away that video. If someone said to you, Jason, I need you to cut together a video of every time someone said the N-word, your first question would be, well, how do I find that out? Because there's thousands of hours of material there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there's, even if you use AI, even if you use something like Otter, someone would have to upload every Joe Rogan episode.
Yeah.
So that's not something some guy does at home on Final Cut Pro or iMovie or whatever over the weekend. That was obviously a professionally paid for job. Does that make sense?
I agree with you, Lee. I think you would need, this is one of the areas where your brilliance excels, because what you've just described is the type of problem that there would be a specific expert in Hollywood who would figure that out, who might even have to write a program for you that would somehow find everything like that. Because, the amount of time that it took to create that video, given when this all took place, somebody came up with a way of aggregating all that stuff very quickly.
And what they would have had it done is basically take the footage, take his show, download all of it, and then feed it to an AI program like Otter.ai.
Well, if it were on YouTube, you could get, some of these platforms auto-generate subtitles. So I think the way you'd want to do it would be to pull those things and then, search for the word, obviously.
But you'd still have to go through a lot of, the point is, you'd have to go through a lot of footage.
Yep.
And the way you have to do that is you have to brute force it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Someone's got to sit down and do work. And
a lot of computing power, a lot of storage, a lot of CPU horsepower. That, you're right. That's not something that somebody's just like, oh, yeah, I remember he said this. That would take you days and days to find manually.
Because they found a lot.
Yeah, they did.
And the point was they had to go through a lot. It was not like, I'll put it like this. If he said something on yesterday's episode, people would go, oh, yeah, I remember he said something yesterday.
Yeah.
That's not what this was.
No. And I'll tell you what, I did see that episode where he was talking about going to see the Planet of the Apes movie. And I did find what he said, I was like, whoa, that was definitely inappropriate to say. But, I mean, you know what? Somebody else, I forget who it was, did a video where they went around in some mall in California or Texas or Florida or something, and they asked a bunch of white people, what do you think about what Joe Rogan said? And they were super offended, how he should be canceled, etc. Then they asked an equal number of black people, and each one of them said, well, who cares? He didn't say it to me, and he didn't say it in a hateful way, and I don't really care what he says. And it was interesting how the people who you would expect would be offended by it were not, and the people who shouldn't have any need to be offended by it were.
Now, while we're talking about offense, let's talk about the Holocaust for a second, because that's not controversial.
Right.
But one of the unspoken rules seems to be that if you compare things to the Holocaust, that's offensive.
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
Seems to be, yes.
Now, I'll tell you where it clearly is not applying. China.
Right.
And apparently you can talk about the Uyghur genocide. There's no Uyghur genocide, by the way. That's BS. That's a CIA talking point.
Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a CIA Soros talking point. That's why it's all over the mainstream media.
How do we know that?
But because I've looked into it. All of that stuff comes from this one CIA front group with connections to Soros. But the other thing is the Holocaust Museum in D.C. has a big thing on the Uyghur genocide. Now, what I'm going to point out is the Holocaust Museum is used, I've seen it before, like in Syria. That's a political, they use the, I don't know how else to put it, they use the Holocaust Museum to push political points.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea, I'll put it like this, the other way to tell this is the Uyghurs, it's a Muslim, they all talk about the Uyghur Muslims. Well, they're Salafi connections to the Uyghurs, and there was terrorism. And the average Republican is opposed to radical Muslim extremism, right?
Yes, I would think so.
Except with the Uyghurs. Suddenly they're defending.
Right. Again, I know nothing about it. I hear it on Fox and other places, and I just sort of say, well, I'm not really commenting on this because I don't know anything about it either way.
Yeah, we should talk about that at some point on
High Dive, yeah.
on our show, High Dive, that we do on Patreon every week. Jason and I do a show.
Wednesday nights.
And you can see, but not tomorrow. There's something else I want to talk about tomorrow.
Oh,
I forget what it is right now.
Sure.
But 202-521-1320. Brave is on. Brave from Atlanta. Hey, Brave, what's on your mind?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Two quick things. One, I came into your spot a little bit late, so when you played the clip of the woman speaking on the science changing, I assume that was the CDC director, but I didn't catch the name, so I wasn't sure. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind repeating who that was.
It wasn't the director. I forget her name. Rod, do you remember her name? She's an ex. Do you remember her name?
Dr. Wang on CNN.
Dr. Wang. It's not dirty. Stop snickering, Brave. Get your mind out of the gutter. But that's who that was.
And my wife was listening along, and she has an extremely irritating voice. Extremely irritating voice. It's probably not the nicest thing to say, but it really is very irritating. The other thing I wanted to say, to your point about Joe Rogan and the comment about going to the mall and asking, I joke around with friends quite often, and I say that it seems like limousine liberals, especially white limousine liberals, up all of the racism. They don't leave enough room for any of the minorities to say, hey, this is racist or this is racist or that's sexist or whatever, because they've appropriated all of it. So I just find that frustrating. So these are just two things I want to just say right quick that irritates me. And I just leave it at that.
No, great call, Brave, as usual. It's white man's burden racism is what I refer to it as, basing it on the Rudyard Kipling poem. But this goes back to England in the late 19th century. Yeah. It's the white man's burden to explain to other people how the savages, because that's what the white man's burden thing is about. And
Lee, the first time I watched that Joe Rogan compilation, I, like most people, was overwhelmed. I mean, you get hit with that word 20 times, and it's like, oh, my God. But I watched it again. And there's actually something quite interesting that Joe Rogan is doing. And actually, that compilation emphasizes it. He's exploring the unique nature of that word in that, you know, Richard Pryor can make it the punchline to a joke, and a hip-hop artist can make it the title to an album, and two friends in the street, if they are black, can use it as a term of endearment with one another. But just even him saying it now threatens a $100 million career. There is no other word like that. Why has so much power been given to this word?
I've talked about this before. There's a Harvard professor, brilliant Harvard professor named Randall Kennedy. Randall Kennedy's written a number of very interesting books. And one of them is N-word, but it's not the N-word, it's the N-word.
Right.
And Randall Kennedy, a black professor at Harvard, explores the weird nature of that, because that is you're right, it's weird. And there's a stand-up comedian named Alfonso Baden. It was very funny. And one of his jokes was, he said, I was talking to a white friend of mine, and he said, so it's okay for you to say it, but I can't.
Right.
And Alfonso's punchline is basically like, that's right, that's the rule. And he's right. That is the rule, but who set that as the rule?
I don't know, but this book uses that word, and the subtitle is The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word.
Yes, and it's a great book because Randall Kennedy, I don't use the term brilliant. I'm not slutty with that word. This guy, Randall Kennedy, is a brilliant writer. He's got a number of books, and I spoke to him a few years ago, and I wanted to interview him for Breitbart, and he was very honest. He said, there's no way my friends would let me do an interview with Breitbart. And he was right. Even though, you know, we had a very good conversation, I think he felt like I was going to treat him fairly, because I was. Because I do think he makes a lot of very, very interesting points. You know, he's got a very good book about how if you're black and you get a law degree, I'll put it like this. If you're white and you get a law degree, well, let me do the boom, and then I'll say this when I come back. We'll bring Ted Rall on the backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we're back. I'm Lee Stranahan. We are joined by our special guest host, Jason Goodman, because it's Wednesday. And joining us on the line right now is our friend, author, cartoonist, artist, bon vivant,
Tuesday.
Ted Rall. Oh, Tuesday. Sorry, whatever day it is. It's Jason. It's Jason Day. I don't have to know what day it is specifically. It's just Jason Day. Hey, Ted, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. So I want to talk about something, but I'll bring you in too because you're French, right? French background. In fact, dual citizen, Ted Rall of France. And I was going to make a point, and I'll use you to make the point as well. But let me just say this. We're on 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C., because I like saying that. There's no requirement, but I enjoy saying it. But we're talking about, Ted, have you heard of Randall Kennedy from Harvard?
Yes, of course I have.
Okay, so when you say of course, now why do you say of course? Because I think of course too, but I find a lot of people haven't heard of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't expect to be able to pull up to a Piggly Wiggly and ask any random person if they've heard of Randall Kennedy.
Not his constituents there.
in journalistic, intellectual, political circles, I would say that I think a reasonably well-educated person could be expected to be familiar with his work.
Yeah, because he's written a number of books. We were talking about the Joe Rogan thing, and Jason had mentioned that Rogan was saying it's a weird word, and weird word in the same sense that Randall Kennedy did a whole book about it. And I was talking about something else that Randall Kennedy had written a book about, and that's all. I'll put it this way. So I'm one of those people, if anyone says there's no differences between being black and white, that's absurd. But the differences aren't necessarily the ones that the media pushes all the time. This is the argument I would make. And Randall Kennedy is very good at pointing out some areas of difference. It's if I graduated law school or Ted graduated law school, Ted, if you graduated law school, would you and you decided I just got my degree, I've got to pay off my student loans, and I got offered a job by a big corporate law firm, would you expect anyone to come to you and say, Ted, what are you going to do for the French community? Right? No one would say that to you, would they? I don't know the French. I know no Irish people would say to me, Lee, are you down for the Irish community? Why are you going to work for a corporate law firm? Why don't you do something that deals with Irish issues? Would you? Right. I don't know, again. But by the way, Rod speaks French. So feel free to speak some to him, Ted. But is there any pressure?
I think that's right. That pressure would not exist on me in any way, shape, or form.
Whereas, and the point Randall Kennedy makes in one of his books is that if you're black, there's a fair amount of pressure to not take that job, do something for the community. And he talks about that. And then when I've actually heard that, I have heard that kind of talk publicly, where people they'll talk about things that way. So that's one clear area. Now, I'm not saying it's not even political to me, but I think that's one of those areas. I interviewed a few years ago. I met Daniel Choi. He was the last guy thrown out of the military. He was a Marine. For Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He was Dan Choi was gay and Asian, obviously. And I met him at a party at CPAC that my friend Andrew Breitbart threw. And I talked to Dan Choi. And he said one of the things he learned was that that being Asian put him in a different category. Whereas if he'd just been, like he said, and him even showing up at a party that Breitbart threw at CPAC was controversial. He said, if you're white, you can be any race and any political party. Forgive me, if you're white, you can do that. You can be a member of any political party. And people won't really call you a traitor to your race or whatever. But he knew people who were mad at him because he was gay and at a Republican Party. And he's like, I want the right, just as if I were straight, to be able to go to a party and not assume that because I'm eating their free hors d'oeuvres that I agree with him on everything. And I think that is an area. Ted, what's your, because we've talked about identity politics before, what's your take on the Rogan thing and some of the stuff we're talking about here, Ted Rall?
Well, the Rogan thing is interesting. You know, I have a fundamental problem with the idea that, you know, any kind of distribution platform should be pressurable to deplatform anyone by someone else. I mean, I don't like the idea. Let's say, for example, I'm syndicated by the same company, Universal Press Syndicate, formerly known as Universal Press Syndicate, now Andrews McMeel Syndication, that distributes Ann Coulter. And I don't think that I should go to my bosses at Andrews McMeel and say, you know, get rid of Ann Coulter or you'll lose Ted Rall. And I don't think Ann should do the same thing to me. And I think, I don't know Ann, but I bet she agrees with me. And I think, you know, it becomes, I think that what Neil Young did was dangerous and toxic. And, you know, I have been opposed to these kinds of moves over and over again. I mean, it's kind of really meta because Rogan allowed other people to express views. So he provided a platform for people who expressed views that Neil Young didn't like. And then Neil Young tried to get Spotify to remove Rogan. And then he ended up, you know, going himself. And so, you know, the net result of all this nonsense is that Spotify fans, Neil Young fans who, you know, don't get to hear him on the Spotify that they pay for, and it was just, you know, the whole thing is just, it's nasty on so many levels. It's just not the kind of thing that we ought to be doing. I think a platform like Spotify or Pandora or any platform like that, like Facebook, it should be neutral. You should be able to, you know, they shouldn't care. They should just be like, we post it, we let the people decide.
Yeah.
No, I could not agree more with that, Ted. And I think you make a great point, too, and you're completely right. This is not about something Joe Rogan said. He interviewed other people. And what bothered me about it, I thought this was an assault on the audiences. And not only that, it's an assault on the audience's cognitive ability. It's saying to the audience, it's saying, basically, I don't want people to hear somebody who presents opinions that are outside the mainstream narrative. And that's very dangerous.
But wait a minute, you're being too generous, Lee, because they don't even go as far as saying that they're sharing opinions that they don't like. They just categorically call Joe Rogan a disseminator of misinformation. So they just universally label him as misinformed and the things that he put out there as misinformation. It's not like Neil Young came forward and said, Joe Rogan said the following, and it's false because here's better information and better evidence that shows that it's false. Joe Rogan should retract this, or, you know, he's not pointing to a sequence of false statements that have been made maliciously. And this is not to say that I think that every single thing that Joe Rogan has ever said is correct. I just object to this blanket use of the term misinformation without even describing exactly what it was said that was incorrect or what they proposed to say to correct it.
Ted?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, there's no, there's no direct assault on a specific act, a misstatement. But on top of that, you know, if once we're going to go down this road, do I really have to, snatch the low-hanging fruit of, say, the misinformation that has been printed in countless mainstream publications like the New York Times or the Washington Post? Do I have to enumerate, shall we talk about Iraq? Shall we talk about Russiagate? I mean, really, should we talk about, just running interference for the military-industrial complex, or that ridiculous story the other day, completely unsourced, about Russia's supposed plans to revive, what Hitler did to justify the invasion of Poland, with the fake video and all that. I mean, it's absurd on its face because it's unsourced. And so, I mean, that's the kind of thing. Like, look, it's unsourced information in a newspaper is by definition a lie, even if it's true, because it's unsourced. And it's just like, where does this end? And besides which, what about innocent mistakes? What about, what if I'm a talk show host and I have someone come on my show and they say something that's wrong, untrue, maybe a lie, and I just don't know. I don't catch it. So I should be deplatformed because of that? Really?
Well, and often they don't even care if something's actually misinformation or not. The Department of Justice did a report attacking Radio Sputnik and RT. And one of the things they attacked us for specifically, Ted, was that we reported that there were protests in Europe about COVID-19. And they didn't say we got anything wrong. They said that basically even reporting that there were protests in Europe was problematic for them. And sorry, there were protests in Europe. They didn't say we took a position pro-protest or anything. We literally were attacked for reporting the existence of it. So let me ask you this, Ted. As an author and an artist, are you extra bugged by this? Be honest. You're a little extra bugged, aren't you?
I am. And, I've been consistent on this point. I can't say I've been consistent about everything all the time, but I've been consistent on the idea that, I'm against censorship and canceling kind of efforts. I editorialized against efforts in the 1990s to boycott Rush Limbaugh's advertisers, Dr. Laura Schlesinger, people like that. I've refused to sign on to them. I've argued against them. This is something that unfortunately both sides do. And I think it's more hypocritical when it comes from the left, because to me, the left is supposed to be more about freedom and the free exchange of ideas, and the right is more authoritarian. So it's really wrong. And yeah, it bugs me because, look, if this prevails, I'm done, and people who do what I do are done. It's like, it's just, we will, they talk about Trump being an existential threat to democracy. Well, this is an existential threat to democracy.
Well, and let's talk about what you do for a second. By the way, you can find out more of what Ted does. Watch how effortlessly I slip the plug in here, Ted, by going to RALL.com, raw.com. This is where you can find more about Ted's work. See what I did there? I'm a pro. But as a political cartoonist who does, like in the history of political cartooning, political cartoons by their nature tend to be short and punchy, right? Which means you've got to be riding the edge of edgy, or there's no freaking point, right? Am I right about that broadly? And that would tend to make you're already walking a tightrope. I'll put it like this. It's like someone doing, I'll put it like this. If you want to do easy stand-up, talk about, have you ever noticed when you got on an airplane that they talk about that kind of stuff. But as soon as you get into politics at all as a comic, at all, I don't care what it is, as soon as you get into anything that's got substance, you're going to piss off some people. And as a political cartoonist, I got to say, you'd have to be doing the political equivalent of Family Circus, Family Circle, or whatever it was. You know what I'm talking, the Bill Keane thing.
Circus. Mm-hmm.
Circus, Family Circus. Family Circus was not controversial, right? No. But as soon as you delve into politics, as soon as you delve into politics at all, you've left that realm. You're going to piss off somebody, right, Ted?
Inevitably. I mean, I think it's one of the things that happens as a political cartoonist's career goes on. Most of them end up, by the time they're my age, hated and reviled by pretty much everyone, because at some point when you've done hundreds of cartoons a year for 30 years, you get to the point where, there's really no one left untouched or unscathed, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, and people need to realize now, and what they're doing to Rogan. What bothered me was, I think that, here's what I think. They knew there was no way, really, they were going to end Joe Rogan's career. Because for one thing, someone said to me, well, they're going to go after his funding. No, they're not. Because Joe Rogan, unlike, let's say, a guy like Alex, let me compare Rogan to Alex Jones for a second. Forget their ideas, forget their style, anything else. Alex is a businessman who has a payroll to make. He's got people who work for them. I'm just saying that's the reality. And the reason he sells vitamins and stuff like that is because he needs to bring in money to pay those people. They've got families to feed and so on. Rogan is him and Jamie, whoever, his producer engineer. That's it. And he gets one big check from Spotify. So Rogan's not a guy who needs to raise money on PayPal or GoFundMe or whatever, or Patreon or whatever. So he's unassailable from a funding perspective. Jason, you know something about this, but do you agree with me on my point that Rogan is, you're not going to get him in the wallet? Does that make sense?
Well, if they get him off of Spotify, which Spotify's CEO, I think his name is Daniel Ek, has been quite adamant that they aren't going to do, I disagree with the first thing you said. I think they did think they would hit him in the pocket by getting him kicked off of Spotify. But the interesting thing is Rumble has already come up and said, irrespective of what Spotify says, come over to Rumble, we'll give you $100 million, and we won't censor any of your podcasts. Right now, Spotify has removed something like 100 episodes, including the episode with Alex Jones.
But even there, if they were offering him enough money, and he moved to Austin, he moved out of L.A.
Yeah.
So his nut, it's not dirty. I'm just saying his vig.
It's low.
The money.
Right. Yeah. He's in a way
It's
different position than Alex Jones. It seems quite clear. I mean, this is my opinion now. When Alex Jones has the pillow advertisements and whatever, I don't know if that's something that he chooses to do or, as you've pointed out, something that he needs to do, because just the nature of the way he's built his operation. Alex Jones was not famous and then started InfoWars in the way that Joe Rogan started his podcast. Joe Rogan had money from syndicated sitcoms and game shows and going and doing the commentary on MMA.
Right, and even if they fired him, I'll bet they'd have to pay him some kind of settlement.
Right.
Which
not only that, Lee, I would bet that Joe Rogan probably at this stage of his life, even if they fired him today and he never worked again, probably has enough money to live much more comfortably than the average person for the rest of his life without ever working again. I think probably.
And I don't know the details of his personal life, but it doesn't seem to me like he's got a lot of kids running around and a few ex-wives.
Correct. One wife, 2 kids. He's good.
Right. Right. So you know what I'm saying. So I think what they wanted to do, Ted, is what they got, which is they got in his head. And this is the point that I have for you. What happens as an artist who's, you're not trying to be edgy, I'm guessing. You don't wake up in the morning like, what can I do that will piss people off? But on the other hand, you don't want that in your head, do you? When you're creating.
No,
does that make sense at all?
You really don't, and it requires some some cognitive dissonance, because obviously I've been deplatformed from some places. I've been fired, in my view, unfairly due to my opinions, and from some places, and so it's there, but you have to sweep it aside and just be yourself. Otherwise, what's the point? You are no longer, if you censor yourself, then you're worse off than, at least if you go out with a bang and, you got fired fair and square. Well, better to have loved and lost, right, than to have never loved at all. You got to rock it. This is a punk rock occupation, and you can go down in flames, and that's fine. That's how it has to be. But it's hard when you have bills to pay.
I have a question for both of you. What do you think about Joe Rogan apologizing?
So that's to me. Then I'll throw it to you, Ted. To me, it indicated that they succeeded in what they wanted to do. They got in his head because I don't think he had anything to apologize for. Right. This was not like he'd said something genuinely offensive. I don't think he did say anything genuinely offensive unless you accept the premise that saying the word, even discussing someone else saying the word, is inherently offensive, which I don't. Because I don't know where you were on the Whoopi Goldberg thing, Ted, but I defended Whoopi Goldberg. I don't think she said anything, and I didn't like that's how consistent I am. I'm not a Whoopi Goldberg fan, but I thought that was BS too. Ted, what do you say in general?
In general, I agree with you, Lee. I mean, no, there should have been no apology. These days, you have to appease the howling dogs of the crowd, of the mob, like a victim of a cultural revolution struggle session. Aquafina, the rapper and actor, recently had to do that, and she issued this long, full of woke vocabulary, basic statement about why she had to go off. She had to leave Twitter because she caused offense and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, enough. It's like, enough. Like, no. And, I've only apologized once in my career. It was over something really genuinely. I think I made a mistake. It was an honest mistake, but it was a mistake. You know what? It was a mistake. I should have never apologized. I lost the Washington Post because I apologized, because I didn't stick to my guns. People have to stand firm. It's when you don't, unless you really, really think you did something wrong, you shouldn't, it's like being interrogated by the police. You shouldn't confess to a crime that you did not commit.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one point I will disagree on, though, is that I don't think he needed to apologize for anything having to do with what Neil Young said or the interview with Dr. McCullough. But you know what? Even forget about the compilation. When I was watching the episode where he was talking about going to the movies and he said, dude, we walked into the Planet of the Apes. That I thought was offensive because he was talking about a black audience in the movie theater and comparing the audience to apes. I mean, how is that not offensive? But I still don't think he should have apologized. He should have just, that's what he said. And in the overall arc of what he was trying to do with the word, I like, Lee, how you brought it back to Professor Randall, the Harvard guy. I should know him better than I do. But I like how you brought it back to that. Kennedy, right. Exploring the power of that word is worthwhile. And I think that Joe Rogan was doing that by saying it, by being a white guy saying it. He was experimenting with and exploring the power of the word. And tomorrow on High Dive, we'll talk more about Whoopi Goldberg. I've thought about it more, and I still disagree with you on that.
Yeah, we'll talk about it tomorrow. But, we grew up in an era, Jason, I know you and I grew up, when every Richard Pryor album, even me saying the names of the albums.
Right.
And even saying Richard Pryor on his great album, Bicentennial N-Word, sounds stupid. I hate saying it because it does sound stupid. Ted Rall, great discussion. By the way, if you want to potentially be offended, RALL.com, Rall.com is where to do it. There we go. Thanks so much to Tyler Nixon. Thanks to Jason Goodman. Thanks to Rod from France. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks to Tarif. Thanks to Ingrid. We'll be back tomorrow on the best damn talk show in the world. I'm Lee Stranahan. This has been The Backstory.
listening to Radio